Hi, everybody. It's Plastic EP here in Melbourne, Australia. And it gives me one of the greatest pleasures to introduce Gary Van Scyoc from New Jersey, the man from Elephant's Memory. Welcome, Gary.
Hey, glad to be here. How you doing?
I'm very well. Make sure you call me
Listen,
Plastic.
you're Plastic EP, right?
Yeah,
And I'm from the Plastic Ono band, so we could be the Plastic Brothers. How's that
fantastic. I
work?
love that. That's fantastic there, Gary. Now listen, you've had an extraordinary life, and I've got Charles Rosenay on, and he's got exclamation marks saying Gary and about 50,000 exclamation marks after your name. How big is
Yeah,
that?
I'm paying homage to him right now. I have his RockCon T-shirt on here from 2010. He promoted this con, RockCon, the convention in 2010.
I've also got to say, Gary, I don't know if you know, but he's doing an event for Lennon's 80th birthday. That's
Yeah,
coming up. He's
yeah.
got a big event on. Do you
I'll
know
be
about
here
that?
before we know it. Very exciting. I wish him luck. That'll be a great event.
That's great. Now listen, let's get into what we want to talk about. John Lennon came looking for you. Now that's like unbelievable. Tell me
I've
that story.
never really quite put it that way, but you're right, absolutely, because John and Yoko had heard a tape of us. We had done a live broadcast on a radio station on Long Island, New York, and somehow somebody made a cassette of the performance and slipped it to John and Yoko the next day. And that person was Jerry Rubin, the political activist here in the United States at the time. We're talking 1971 here. And so he received the tape. John and Yoko loved it. And we knew they had received the tape and we were hoping they'd listen to it. But you never know about these things. It's all fate. So we kind of forgot about it for a couple of weeks. It was 1971, just a little before Christmas. And suddenly we were at rehearsal one night and our road managers ran into the room and said, John and Yoko are out in the lobby and they want to come in and meet you guys and play. And we thought they were kidding because we were kind of in the middle of a heavy rehearsal that night. And we thought they were just putting us on. We didn't take it really serious. We kept John and Yoko waiting for about an hour before we brought them in. And John comes in that white suit from Abbey Road. And my knees just buckled. I mean, it was so exciting to see them together and come in. And we had a bunch of guitars there, and they wanted to play. We played for hours and hours and hours. We did all the old rock and roll stuff: Bo Diddley, Chuck Berry, everything. Dizzy Miss Lizzie, you name it. We played it till our fingers were sore. And about 5 o'clock in the morning, John looks over at the rest of us and says, I'd like to join your band. And we all went, what the heck? This isn't going to fly. And, but it turns out after some more discussion, he was serious. And we sat down and worked something out. And Yoko piped up about a merger, and it became the Plastic Ono Elephant's Memory Band, which, if you take the first letters, spells poem, Poem. And Yoko was off the wall with that. She was very excited about that, already thinking about the marketing and all. So it was exciting.
Gary, can I say, when he said I want to join the band, did you say, okay, you passed the audition?
Oh, he definitely passed the audition. That wasn't an issue, let me tell you. He was a little shaky at first when he started playing some of the songs. I don't think he had played in a while. But it didn't take more than 40, 45 minutes, and he was back in the groove. He was sounding great. So
And what a voice. Just a fantastic voice, isn't it? Just rock and roll legend, like the biggest artist of all time.
There's no doubt about it. I was personally in high school when the Beatles broke, like in my town in 1964. I was a huge Paul fan, so it was kind of weird for me to end up playing with John. but it was obvious I wasn't going to be the bass player in the Beatles. So it's just amazing the way it ran and worked out to end up being playing with John for a couple of years.
Would you say when you played with him, because I got people already asking questions. Somebody asked when you were playing and let's say recording, did he stick to song arrangements or did he do it on the fly or did he do it by feel? And when he was talking to you and he wanted something, was he fussy or picky about how you particularly played, for example? Or did he just let you do your thing once he heard it? He knew you had the vibe. He didn't worry about it. He knew you had the sound.
That's a great question. He was pretty lenient. He never really got down on anybody about doing their parts or changing it. Luckily, I guess everything went smoothly at the sessions. We were at the record plant for a couple of weeks, record plant studio here in New York City, to do the Sometime in New York City album. That was the first serious recording we did with him. And he would come in about 7 o'clock and with a finished song. And most likely it would end up that we would end up playing exactly that arrangement. Now, there were a few exceptions on some of the songs where, add a solo or he would just, hem and haw in the corner for a minute and come up with another verse we'd never heard before. There was a couple of times it kind of got spontaneous. But by and large, he had it nailed before he even came in at 7 o'clock. So by 7 the next morning, that's 12 hours, we had a finished mixed record every day, one song a day. And the context of that album was he was approaching it like it was a newspaper, like there would be a subject that day in the news, and he would write the song, bring it in, we'd record it, it'd be finished the next morning at 7, and it's as if he would just go out and throw it out into the street as if it were a newspaper. That was his concept on the whole thing, the way he approached it for 2 whole weeks, solid, no breaks.
That's a great analogy, you telling me that, because as I said, I write songs myself, but saying it's like a newspaper and this is the news of the day and ends up being the topic and the song, that to me is like unbelievable. I've never heard that.
Yeah, because like some of them was like Attica State, the terrible prison outburst that was happening in upstate New York at the time. That was one of the subjects of the songs. And that had literally only happened a few weeks before he brought that song in. It wasn't like it was the night before, but it was very recent, very fresh, all of the topics. Sunday, Bloody Sunday, the terrible situation in Ireland. That had only happened a small, short time before he brought it in and had the song completed as well.
Gary, I want to ask you, in that period of time, 2 years that you were with John, what was the bass that you played? What model was it? What was it? Do you still own it?
I don't own it anymore because I basically wore it out. I wasn't too hip to like wearing out frets and fretboards and stuff back then. I just played. So unfortunately, I took the bass a little too far and ruined all the frets and dug into the fretboard, the actual rosewood neck of the bass. And I had a huge thumb hole on it that made it almost uncomfortable to play anymore. So no, that one went by the wayside, unfortunately. But it was a 1964 Fender jazz bass. My parents bought it for me for my sophomore year in high school.
What are you currently playing? How many basses do you own? I'm just asking. Do you have 1 or 2 at the moment?
Well, I was up to 9 for a while and liquidated for a while. And actually, I'm down to like 2 right now, a 4-string and a 5-string.
And what models are they, Gary? I'm just fascinated.
I still play a Fender 4-string. It's a newer model, though. You could buy it on the internet right now. It's a new version. But it's got the 12-volt batteries in it that makes it a lot stronger for live, a lot more output. So I use that on a lot of the gigs. But I also have a very expensive handmade instrument by a company in Brooklyn, New York called Fodera, Fodera. And that's my 5-string.
Well, I was saying, coming from New York and living there, for example, because you're in New Jersey now, you must be so proud of that bass.
Oh, there's no doubt. They're both my honeys. Besides my
Now,
wife.
listen, Gary, I've got to ask you, while you're playing with John Lennon for 2 years, you've got to tell me things that no one knows. For example, when you were practicing with John or something, did he say jokes all the time? Did he say things that you'd never heard of? Did he talk about Paul or Ringo or George on any occasion? Tell me stuff that no one knows. That's what I want.
Well, I don't know whether they know it or not, but one of the things that always seems to come up is, we would hear in the newspaper, the Village Voice is this, local rag in the village in New York City. And there'd be an article you'd read in the morning. I'd be going to do a session in the morning, and I'd read in the Village Voice that Paul and John were totally at each other's throats, and it would never be a salvageable relationship or whatever. And I'd get to the session at 7:00, and John would be calling Paul in Scotland, and they'd be yucking it up on the phone for like an hour and a half. And basically, the session would come to a close until they got their jollies off, just yucking it up. It sounded like a couple of brothers on the phone to me. So that all that stuff was out to lunch.
See, but that's great because you were there and you know.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Also in the record plant, I'm just saying, didn't he make a bed there near the piano? Didn't he have a bed?
Did he have a what? I'm sorry?
Did he put a bed in the studio if he wanted to lie down?
Oh, no. They made the regular trips back to the Dakota. And,
Okay.
I would go out on 8th Avenue one day, and I found them at 7 in the morning standing in the middle of 8th Avenue trying to hail a cab. So I just pulled up and said, "What the hell you doing? You're a Beatle. Get in the car, for God's sakes," And I would take them home, They love New York so much, They just wanted to be New Yorkers through and through.
That's just amazing. Now listen, you must have had a few mementos from John. Did he sign anything for you, or did he give you something for being with him for 2 years, or did Yoko give you something? Any mementos?
Well, I ended up with some of his T-shirts, strangely enough. We had this little thing where I would come in with a certain T-shirt on, and he would have one on like that said, "You are here," or some kind of weird thing on it that they were into back then. And we would just swap shirts in the middle of the session. I would give him mine, and he would give me his. So I ended up with quite a nice little collection. I ended up selling them to a collector years and years and years later. But that was one of the little funny things we had.
Did he sign anything?
No, I never got any signatures from John, That's interesting, but I never thought to do it at the time. You think the relationship's going to go on forever. You don't think in terms of well, I've got 2 years, so I better stuff it all in. You just kind of go with it and flow with it. And that's just one thing that never came to pass.
Of course, you sound like an easy roller. That's unreal. Now, listen, those gold records at the back, they make up for not getting his signatures. Can you tell me a little bit about those? They're amazing.
About what? I'm sorry?
The gold records behind you, they're amazing.
Records. Yeah, those are all from the time with John. That's one for an album called Shaved Fish, gold and a platinum. And there's one there that's the live record from Live in New York City. Live in New York City at the Garden. We did a concert at Madison Square Garden with John, and that record went gold. And there's one back there, one of my favorites is from the Imagine album. It's the Imagine movie soundtrack that I'm on several cuts on that. So there's more of them. We just haven't gotten around to procuring a lot of the other ones. I think there's other ones floating around that Elephants are probably deserving of. I don't have our gold record for Midnight Cowboy, the famous motion picture, which the Elephant's Memory played on the soundtrack of that movie, with starring Dustin Hoffman, Academy Award-winning movie. That one was kind of tossed around the band. We kind of shared it for a while, and then people started dying on me, and I kind of lost track of it.
I got to say, Gary, I got one of your best friends. Well, I got two of them online now. I got Mitch Wiseman, our very good friend. Now, that guy, I love him. Everyone loves him. Same as they like Charles Rosen, eh? But he gives you a big hello.
Did you say Mitch Weissman?
That's the man.
I know him well. I haven't spent a lot of time with him, but we certainly know him. He's a Facebook friend, that's for sure. And I'm aware of his career. He's a great artist.
I've interviewed Mitch, I think on a Sunday morning, right? And we did one interview about his Beatlemania stage show.
Right.
And he was so kind. He did another interview with me straight after about Kiss. And that was really great. Kiss, the rock band.
Yeah, well, I don't know whether this a bit of trivia that
please.
The originators of Beatlemania were my management firm of Lieber and Krebs. Was Elephant's Memory's manager, our personal managers during the time that we were with Lennon. And I also worked with a couple other guys from Beatlemania. Randy Clark, who did the John character. I don't know whether Mitch worked with him or not at the same time, but I know there were several guys through the show. But I spent a nice 6-month gig with Randy Clark from Beatlemania, and doing a show after John was killed. We took it around the East Coast, and it called the show Imagine, and it was everybody can find that on YouTube. I think if they look, all the tunes are on there. That was in 1981.
I just want to ask you, Gary, did you end up going for a private lunch or dinner with John and Yoko, or did they do anything special for you yourself personally over the 2-year period?
Oh, certainly. It was always a party at the studio. Sometimes we were in there for weeks and weeks and weeks. We went on to do Yoko. He did an album for us, which was a couple of weeks, the Elephant's Memory album on Apple. And later on, after the live record, we did a double album with Yoko at the record plant. So it was like, I think you had it right before. We should have moved our beds into the record plant, because it would have been a lot more convenient, and we'd have probably saw a little bit more of our families back then. We gave an awful lot of time to the Lennons that year of 1972 specifically. And but one night every night after the sessions, if we weren't totally exhausted and went home to collapse, we would go out to eat. And one particular night, we went down to Chinatown, which Yoko was always fond of ordering in from. But this particular night, we took limos down to a particular Chinese restaurant and ordered everything on the menu, plus every drink known to man. And the bill must have been astronomical. I mean, I can't imagine back in 1972. It must have been like close to $1,500, a couple of grand probably. And it turns out that nobody had any money. John and Yoko had no money. Nobody in the band had a cent, because we were with the Beatles. We just assumed we were going to have our meals paid. I mean, you just take it for granted. You know what I mean? So it ends up nobody had 1 cent. And then I thought the owner was going to have a heart attack. He was like standing over in the corner going, "Oh my God, what am I going to do?" So they had to send somebody up to the Dakota to fetch some credit cards to clear the bill up at the end of the night. So we laughed about that for months.
Can you imagine you and John washing dishes to pay the bill?
Yeah. Normally, we didn't have to worry about it. Trust me. We would be at Tavern on the Green in Central Park after the concert at the Garden, or, going out to all these extravagant places besides the home restaurant that I mentioned was almost every other night. And, but yeah, that was a little different, getting embarrassed like that. But like I said, we laughed for months about that. It's one of my favorites.
I got to ask you, Gary, I got a friend of mine here in Australia. He's a very good friend. His name's Roger. And at the time, he tried to get the Elephant Memory album, and he had a hard time getting the album, but he finally got it. If you'd be kind enough just to say hello to Roger here in Sydney, Australia, he's a rock photographer, a good friend of mine. He'd really appreciate it because he bought your album back then.
Now, do you mean an actual LP, or do we mean?
I think he bought a record. That's all he told me when I spoke to him.
Well, thank you, Roger. I really appreciate your tenacity to go after that. Those are definitely not easy to find, I know. The bad thing about the whole thing was our album on Apple, the Elephant's Memory titled record, which is, I assume he's talking about.
Yeah, that's what he's talking about.
Is still not available on CD. So enjoy it, because you've got the only thing to listen to.
He told me he had such a hard time that he had to keep telling the person to try and organize and get him that album. And that's at the time, not now.
Right. Yeah, it's not easy to find. I don't know what the holdup is there. The suits at Apple have released about everything else on CD except our record, and I really don't understand it.
But they also haven't released the Beatle cartoons yet, all right? We're waiting on that one too.
That's coming up soon, right?
I don't know. I hope so.
so.
I hope so too, Gary. But listen, you got to understand, you're at the pinnacle musically with John and Yoko, okay? And now you look back at it, and I like the way how you just, an easy roller, just did what you had to do for 2 years, fit it in, recorded, played with them, did everything. Looking back on it, because I want to be in the positives, the period before John's death, right? The 2 years that you had with him, you could write a book. It would have to be that fascinating, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I've been tempted time and time again to do it, But it seems like every time I'm about to sit down and start to do that, a great interviewer like you comes along, and I get to talk about stuff for a while, and then I just forget about it again. And there was something like the Lennon NYC movie that came up on PBS. Or, I was actually in another one called Strange Fruit, which is the history of Apple. So they keep calling me to come in and do these little cameos and interviews. So I've kind of managed to get a few things off my chest through the years, doing those kind of things.
Gary, I feel so much at home and just relaxed and talking to you, just like a gracious interview this is. But tell me something. I need to pick your brain now. And being from Australia makes things a bit harder. Tell me things about John and Yoko that you experienced that you've never told before. Can you give me something? So I'll go away thinking that was amazing what he said.
Well, I think maybe a lot of people some people may have gotten the impression that John was a little pussy whipped. And that couldn't be further from the case when one night at the record plant, we were working out one of the songs, and Yoko kept coming in and interrupting us. And then she would go back, and we'd get started again. And this was a very crucial time of teaching the band the song. And then she would come back in and interrupt John, like, what do you want to order out for food? Or whatever. So finally, about 3 times after she'd come in and interrupted, John just turned and unloaded on her. Fucking hell! And put her right in her place, and she scooted her little butt right out of there, and we didn't see her for another hour and a half. So they had their thing going. It was back and forth.
Of course.
They had a great love relationship.
Of course, they loved each other. We've got to say good things.
It went a little sour at the end there with us, and John had a little transgression there, and he got his ass kicked out of the house, and that kind of put a damper on our thing there too.
Gary, you know the big question I'm going to ask you now. I mean, it's obvious. Did you party with John Lennon in the lost years?
We partied everywhere.
Come on, tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I can remember, getting pissed with John at that home restaurant that we were talking about, and having to help him out of the restroom. Once John was not a great drinker. He just wasn't. He was good up to a point, and then he went off the cliff. It's the best way to explain it. What do you got there, sir?
I got a beetle. Beetle mug that I
that.
want to show you. Nothing is real.
Very nice.
They're coming out of the Yellow Submarine. And since you're talking about your friend, John Lennon, did he ever talk to you about Paul with you? Like say, hey, Gary, you play bass this way. Paul used to play this way, upside down. Or Paul used to do this. Did he ever say anything about Paul to you?
Never, musically, never one comparison. He never put me on the spot about that or tried to get me to play like Paul. He didn't really ask me to change to another bass for a different sound or anything. We just went for that one sound of my Fender Jazz bass, and the record plant had such a great gear in there. They just had that Fender Jazz bass tweaked in perfectly. So there was no need to do anything like that. It wasn't kind of the experimentation thing that they probably did along the way in the Beatles. They just went for that one sound, that rough sound. And then, if it got too clean, John would ask them to make it more distorted. He wasn't into the clean thing.
Did you ever see John driving that green station wagon, the one that's famous around there in New York?
No, I think that was after I was with John. I think that was after they came back down from the farm.
I got a feeling that he did something for you, some kind of surprise. Did he do anything out of the way for just you specifically?
Well, musically, he chose my song as the single from our Elephant's Memory album, and wrote some nice piano lines for it, and recorded him on Wurlitzer electric piano, and actually included that. I re-released that song. It's called Wind Ridge, and it's on my new album that's out now that I released in 2015. It's called Pop Goes the Elephant. You can get it on my website, www.garyvanscyoc.com, and that's the only place it's available. But it's I re-released that song that John worked very hard on with me, and I asked him to take writing credits for it, but he wouldn't do it. But I consider that the biggest gift he could have given me, even though he didn't want any writing credits. For him to take my song in hand and spend almost 2 complete days on it, that was like a gift, I'll never forget.
That's the ultimate.
Yeah.
That's the ultimate you can get. And that, to get your song and play on it and be humble, no big deal, and do it out of respect for you, that is
give it a listen, because the piano lines that he wrote are just awesome. They're just very haunting. Typical Beatles stuff right off the bat, right off the top of his head. Amazing.
What's it like at the record plant? I've never been there. What was it like back then? Constant party? Did you have, I'm just saying, did you have fans coming in or girls coming in or someone coming in? Who came in unexpected during the 2 years of sessions?
There was never a night that somebody didn't come in unexpected.
Who came in? Come on, tell me the celebrity. Come on, we got time, Gary.
Let's start with Jackie Kennedy Onassis. Came in with a bunch of Secret Service agents one night, and she had a little friend with her. Rudolph Nureyev, the famous ballet dancer, was with her, and Carly Simon, who used to be in Elephant's Memory. As a matter of fact, a couple years before I joined the band, Carly Simon was in Elephant's Memory, and so she couldn't wait to stop by, and it was just somebody every night. I mean, it was just unbelievable. Mick Jagger was there for a couple of nights. At one point at the record plant, when Mick came, we just closed the session down and broke out some more guitars, and Mick and John and the Elephants, we just played for like 3 hours straight. And I think some of that stuff is actually, you can hear some of that on the bootlegs. I think some people have grabbed a few little outtakes of some of that stuff. And it was great. I mean, I was surprised at how good Mick Jagger played guitar. I did not peg him as a guitar player. I just thought he did the frontman thing, but he played pretty good little blues guitar. It was pretty cool.
But that's great because I didn't know that either. And you're talking back then, so he's obviously a better guitar player now.
Exactly. So I'm sure he didn't stop playing.
Who else? Did Jack Nicholson come or someone like that?
No, that's about all I can remember off the top of my head. Yeah, those were the highlights. Pretty hard to beat Jackie Kennedy, you know. It was pretty thrilling, you know. And Mick, really. I mean,
Mick Jagger, that's a big one, I'd say. Mick Jagger.
Yeah, there you go. That's a big
now, listen, Gary, I want to thank you so much for this interview. It's been fascinating, but not only that, the insights you gave us is what makes it. So I want to thank you, and if you've got anything to say to your fans, please say it now where they can find you again, or, you know.
I just want to thank you. It was just so nice of you to reach out to us and Eva, and this has been a real pleasure. You know, I love this format as well. The StreamYard is great. I had used it one other time, and this thing is smooth, huh?
Exactly. But as I said, I want to thank Charles Rosenay. I want to
thank you, Charles Rosenay, Mitch Weissman, all those people that I know, and give my regards and Eva's regards. Thank you so much. And this has been a real pleasure. We enjoyed it. I would normally be out playing tonight, probably, but around 7 o'clock is when I'd be leaving for a gig. So this kind of made up for it. But this is really hell not working, I got to tell you.
Gary, this is the best. I've loved it.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Just stay there, Gary, and we'll say goodbye to everyone out there. Just wave goodbye to your fans out there because everyone loves you.
All right, so long, everyone. Appreciate it. Good to have this time. Thanks for sharing.
See ya.